All right. Hello, everyone. This is Tam Pham, founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency. And today with me, I have Ari Meisel. How are you today, buddy?
Doing great. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today, Tam. Thanks.
Yeah, we've been following each other's works over the years,
Yeah,
and I'm excited to finally have this podcast and this chat with you here today. But before we start diving into your story and how you get stuff done, would you mind sharing some of your favorite resources right away? Because that's one of the things we always like to start off with.
absolutely. The number one has got to be Voxer with a V for those who have not heard of it. So it's a voice communication app, and it is significantly different from things like WhatsApp or Telegram or iMessage in that it's the only tool that allows you to communicate asynchronously as well as synchronously. So people can actually hear while you're broadcasting, which is kind of a game changer. So 99% of my communication at this point is done over Voxer, which means that through my coaching, my sales calls, even connecting with friends and family, I never have anything scheduled in my calendar ever, and I can get a lot more done in less time. So Voxer is by far the number one. Second one is sort of a recent addition to my tech repertoire, which is the Smart Nora device, which is an anti-snoring device. So I have mild to moderate sleep apnea, and I've had surgeries. I've done like nose strips. I've had a CPAP of all the different things. And this device is really cool. It was a Kickstarter campaign, I believe, originally. And it's very simple. It basically has a microphone that listens. And when it hears you snoring, there's a pad under your pillow that inflates and basically makes you like move your head and you stop snoring. And you don't have to touch anything. It's really cool. And I've been tracking it because biohacking is a passion of mine, and it really works. And then the last one is an old resource for me, but it always comes back, which is Emergency by Neil Strauss. My favorite book of all time, had a really significant impact on me. And it's basically about a true story about a guy who confronted with the anxiety that he experiences after 9/11 and feeling like the world might come to an end. He just goes on this sort of mission to prepare himself for those situations. And he learns how to fly planes and fight and survive and becomes a paramedic and all these different things. And I've done many of those things. And the book was really pivotal for me. So I revisit it every now and then.
Awesome. We will have links to all of that in the show notes here. So thank you for sharing that, Ari. Now, for those of you who don't know who you are, what your story is, one of the things that I found very touching and relatable is how you discovered you had Crohn's disease, and that forced you in a way to figure out a way to be productive because you had limited time, energy to do things that needed to be done. Would you mind sharing that story with everyone?
Sure. Yeah. So when I got out of college, I went into real estate development and construction, and I was really working alongside all of the trades people and learning the trades and not sleeping very much and eating a lot of fast food and smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and just living a very, very unhealthy lifestyle. And at 23, I had amassed an enormous amount of personal debt. I'd been treating my body like a disposable cup, basically. And I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 23, which, for those who don't know, is an inflammatory condition that affects the digestive tract. It's considered to be incurable, and it's very debilitating, very painful. And I was put on a lot of medicine and got really sick. And over a several month period of biohacking, self-experimentation, self-tracking, I was able to actually overcome the illness. But the really the big turning point for me was recognizing that I'd been working like 18 hours a day for 3 years. And now I was in a situation where I very quickly was only able to maybe work an hour a day if I was lucky, but I still had the same workload. So I needed something to help me get all of that stuff done. And quite frankly, the systems that existed out there, the productivity methods and techniques that I was familiar with at the time, weren't cutting it. So I created a new one, which is where less doing came from. So less doing is about optimizing, automating, and outsourcing everything in your life and now your business in order to be more effective. And the question of what would you do if you only had an hour a day to work is always in the back of my mind, because if anything, I've learned that restrictions really do breed innovation.
Yeah, I see that with creativity and design all the time too. When you have restriction, it forces you to be innovative, creative in the sense that otherwise, if you just have a blank canvas that's never ending, you don't have any sort of limitation to what you want to create and do. So when you saw that in your day, and you said to yourself, okay, if I only had an hour a day, how would you then prioritize something?
Well, the interesting thing about that question, right? So I work with people in all walks of life, entrepreneurs, corporate people, everything. I've coached military officers, like you name it. You ask somebody like, what would you do if you had to leave the office an hour early, right? So somebody who works like a 9 to 5, what if you had to leave the office at 4 o'clock? What would you do? And most people, they just sort of respond and say like, I'd probably just skip lunch, which is fine. It would work, right? But you ask that same person, what would you do if you only had 1 hour in the day? And you get this sort of perplexed look, because it's such a different way of thinking, because at that point, the question really isn't what would you do? It's what wouldn't you do? And if the things that you wouldn't do still need to get done, then who or what is going to do them for you? So the game, as it were, is about figuring out how not to do things. But the things still have to get done, right? So that requires systems and processes. In some cases, it requires delegating or outsourcing. And it's harder to do that in many ways. One of the comparisons I always make for people is thinking about firefighting versus fireproofing. And most people are in firefighting mode all the time, especially founders, because it makes them feel important and needed, right? And we see that, I think, to a great extent in the corporate world as well. Fireproofing is a lot less sexy than firefighting, but that's really what we need. That's what will actually make the business sustainable. That's what will make you sustainable. So the prioritization question is really multifaceted, and the way that I approach it is completely different than I think many others do. There's so many methods out there around prioritization. One of the probably more famous ones is Brian Tracy's, Eat the Frog thing. Is that Brian Tracy? I think it is. And basically, like, do the hardest thing first, because then everything's going to be easy down after that. Or the Ivy Lee method, pick 6 things you're going to get done today, and then just do those things. And I disagree with those, because to me, especially if you're part of a team, which almost everybody is part of a team, even if you're like a solopreneur, you have customers. Now, they might not be a team in the traditional sense, but they kind of are. So to me, the prioritization really is about doing the things that people are waiting the longest on from you, right? Because then you remove the bottleneck. If you allow the flow to happen, like, other people are going to get more done, and more and more and more stuff's going to get done. There's a multiplier effect. If you slow things down, there's a significant multiplier effect. You stop somebody from getting what they need for an hour, and 2 weeks later, they miss a deadline. Nobody knows why.
So it's kind of like the theory of constraints. You're always trying to remove the bottleneck and kind of tackle it from there. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
because the truth is, and this is going to sound idealistic, but I mean, I've been doing this for long enough with enough people that it's not. This is a realistic view. I truly believe that everybody who wants to be productive and is motivated to do so, they have all the success and capability and resources within them that they need to do that, and way more than they realize. But there's something or someone getting in the way, and most of the time it's themselves, right? So if we just remove the barrier, then they're going to do the things they need to do.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed over the years of helping a lot of people that the biggest barrier to success, whether it's like online courses or coaching or like personal development or training, or anytime people want to work on themselves, is the main barrier is oftentimes themselves. It's not anything external. And so it's up to us to figure out, like, how can we best help and serve them? Because it's one thing to give them information, but oftentimes they have to make that change within themselves before they actually go ahead and take action and do the stuff. And I'm sure you've seen that too. You can say all the right things and give them all the tools and give them all the things that they need, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to themselves and making them believe that they can do it.
Exactly. The self-awareness that is required in many cases to actually make those changes is something that a lot of us, and I say us, just don't really possess. And that's a skill set that we have to foster in and of itself. one of the expressions that I always like to say is that you can't read the label from inside the jar, right? And most people are operating inside that jar, and they don't realize that there's another way.
Yeah, so switching gears here, I'm really interested and fascinated by your use of Voxer, but also I want to talk a little bit about biohacking because I'm somewhat interested in that as well. But the way we scheduled this podcast interview wasn't over email, like most interviews kind of get scheduled. It was actually done through Voxer, and you kind of mentioned that at the beginning of the podcast. So how did you get started with this, and how do you force people to use Voxer when everyone's accustomed to using email?
Yeah, so it's a great topic. I love this topic. So first of all, email. Whenever I speak, or when I used to speak all around the world, I always like to ask people, what's your biggest productivity challenge? And universally, like globally, I'm talking about 12 different countries, multiple continents. Like the number one thing that always comes up is email as the biggest productivity challenge. The email problem, in my mind, is not an email problem. It's a decision-making problem. And the email inbox is an unusually unique place where we're presented with this opportunity to make thousands of decisions in a given day. You really don't have that in other places of your life. And research tells us that the average human being has about 24 good decisions in them in a day. So we're hopelessly outnumbered. And people use email wrong. It's one of several things in most people's lives where they were given access to it without actual instruction, right? It takes 17 seconds to set up a Gmail account as a 13-year-old. I think that's the minimum age technically. And then you go off to the races and you're getting spam and you're responding to people and you're sending emojis and you're replying and threading and forward. There's no email classes. Certainly not at that age. Maybe there are in college to some extent now, but it's literally, it'd be like giving somebody the keys to a car and saying like, hey, okay, see you in a few years, That's what email is like. And so people use it wrong. They try to use it for everything. We have people who are using email for internal communication, external communication. They use it as a to-do list, even though it's like a to-do list that other people fill for you. And it just doesn't work. And we need to have various tools for various kinds of communication, be really intentional about them. And the first way to deal with email overload is to use email less for communication. The other thing is that email, in my mind, is really a transactional communication tool. You think about the way emails work, it's very much like, hey, I want to buy something from you. Okay, it's this much. Okay, can I give you a credit card? Yeah, it's very ping-pongy. It's not really conversational. Email is not a conversational tool, but people try to use it that way. And then we end up with the 20 BCCs and forwards and things that nobody pays attention to. So fortunately, we have all these other tools. We have Slack, we've got WhatsApp, we've got Teamwork, we have all these different things. And the tool itself is not so important in my mind, as long as you have the tools designated for the different types of communication. Now, Voxer is a game changer because, in my mind, especially nowadays with the pandemic and the shutdowns and everything, the absolute number one skill that you can utilize is asynchronous communication. There is nothing in my mind that will help your communication or your productivity more than communicating asynchronously. And just to be really clear with everybody, it's the opposite of what Tan and I are doing right now, right? This is synchronous communication. I'm responding, he's nodding his head. I can react, he can react. Asynchronous is the opposite, right? Asynchronous is I send a message, you get it when you want, you respond when you want, and so on and so forth. Now, Voxer is a unique tool for this because there are many tools that allow you to send voice messages, and there's tools that let you send video messages too. Voxer has multiple patents, and they're the only tool. It's the only tool that allows you to communicate asynchronously and synchronously. So when you hit the talk button on Voxer, within 0.2 seconds, the person on the other end can start to listen. If they're not there, they listen to it later. If they are there, they can go back and forth, and it feels very, very fluid. So for a long time, I've been using Voxer with my team, and we even do a daily asynchronous stand-up meeting over Voxer. So there's a group message every morning, pops in, and it says, hey team, it's time to check in. What are you doing today, and what is your biggest obstacle? And I have a relatively small team, four people basically, in 3 different time zones. Some days it takes 20 minutes for all of us to check in. Some days it takes 4 or 5 hours, but every day we're all checking in. We're doing it by voice. So you get that emotion, that richness, the tonality, and it helps us stay connected. I also use Voxer because I use it because I communicate with people that way that I just wouldn't otherwise. You know, the friend that you only get to talk to once every 5 or 6 months because you can't find that hour to do it. Now I can send a 30-second, 2-minute, 3-minute message to somebody and they can listen to it then when they want. Time zones become irrelevant. You know, I've got clients all around the world. And the thing that holds people back from asynchronous conversations is simply culture and habit. You know, it's like, oh, you know, you just have to sit down at the table with the person and shake hands for the big sale. It's just how we do it, right? And I like to challenge those kinds of things. So one of the things that I did right back at the beginning of the pandemic is I made a YouTube video. It's about 1.5 minutes and it describes what Voxer is and how I use it. And then I got a vanity URL, which is voxwithari.com, which anybody's welcome to go to. And it basically explains what it is. And then they contact me on Voxer. So what was happening was as soon as people would email me, be like, hey, let's set up a call. Let's set up this. I would just respond with voxwithari.com and then wait. And 9 times out of 10, I'd get a Voxer message from somebody and they'd be like, oh, this is cool. What's this platform? And then we go back and forth. And 100% of the time people would like fall in love with it right away. So then I pushed it further and I was like, let me see if I can do sales calls this way. And I basically I think we did a webinar, and when they registered for the webinar, it was like, hey, thank you, you know, for registering. If you want to get in touch with Ari right now, click this button. Took them to the video and they got in touch. And I launched that, and like on a Sunday morning, I get a message from somebody. It's like, hey, you know, I've never used this before, but this is my business and so. And I responded a couple hours later. And he responded a few hours after that. And I responded the next morning. And basically with 8.5 minutes of exchanged audio messages over the course of 2 days, I made a $1,500 sale, which was like, great. Okay, I can keep going. And then I took it even further. And I stopped doing one-on-one coaching a while ago because, you know, you can't scale that. The business gurus tell you that that's not the way to do it. So I had group coaching and I had courses and all that kind of stuff. And I decided I missed coaching. So for the last 6 months, I've been doing private coaching again, one-on-one, exclusively over Voxer. People, they don't get a Zoom call with me. They don't get a Facebook group. They don't get a content area. They get Zoom access. They get unlimited Voxer access to me. And so I now have 19 private clients, most of whom I speak to every single day for 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes sometimes, maybe longer. And I don't have a single call on my calendar. And the results that I've been seeing are more effective than any coaching I've ever done in my entire life, because I'm like the coach in their pocket. You know, somebody's in the middle of something and they're like, yeah, you know, this thing just happened. What's the best tool for this? How do I deal with this person and this issue? And they let it out and I'll respond, you know, within an hour or a couple hours, whatever it might be. But they never have to book that call with me 4 days in advance for 45 minutes to get the 2-minute answer that they need. And we move things along so much more quickly. It's been such a fascinating experiment. And it's the only way that I'll work with people now. It's, you know, how you and I got connected. Like it's, the platform is the pitch basically.
Wow. That's really interesting and fascinating at the same time, because obviously the way we got to set up was through Voxer as well. And I think it's interesting in the sense that it creates a barrier, but if that person is interested enough and they're willing to overcome that barrier to get in touch with you, that's also a very good thing for you, because you're filtering out in a way people that are just not interested enough to, you know, talk to you or to work with you or interested to do X, Y, and Z with you. Have you seen that too?
Yeah, of course. I've had, like I said, 9 times out of 10, no problem. And then that one time out of 10 is always so fascinating to me. I had somebody made an intro to me. And by the way, PSA for everybody, you should always get what's called the double opt-in before you introduce people, in my opinion, right? You should ask both people if they want to be introduced before you make that intro. Not only does it get the permission, but it also gives some context. So this was not that case. This was a random email from someone I actually didn't even recognize, and they introduced me to somebody else. Say, oh, you know, Ari can help you. Okay. So I respond with voxwithari.com. And he responds with his Calendly link. So I respond with, did you see my link previously? And he's like, oh yeah, as a YouTube video, I'll watch it later. Okay. So he watched it, and then he responded to me and he was like, oh, he said, I don't want to get on another platform that's like $4 a month, which it's free, by the way, $4 a month. Can we just connect for free, at my Calendly? And I responded, and I was like, basically, it was almost like, it's almost like when you get a prank call and you decide to kind of run with it a little bit and just mess with the person. So I was like, all right, well, no, we can't. But also, honestly, like if this is a problem for you, then you actually you might need more help than you realize, I think is what I said. And he kind of went back and forth, and he kept writing back and be like, oh, so is it this kind of like, is it this? It's like, I was like, why don't you just, get on the platform if you want? And then he finally got on Voxer after 17 emails back and forth, which I would never normally do, but I just thought it was funny. And after like 7 Voxers back and forth, he signed up as a client, and it was like, and he told me, he was like, this, obviously, like, I see the benefit of this now. And I said, look, being resistant to change is normal, but we have to recognize it, right? And so this isn't just like, hey, get on this cool new fun app. Like, that's not what this is about. This is a completely different way of thinking about how you communicate. So it's a really good litmus test for that kind of thing. And for the sales calls, if somebody's not going to do a sales call on Voxer with me or a sales conversation, they're not going to coach with me on Voxer either. So yeah, it's my retention rate has been 100% basically for the first time ever.
What I'm curious about then is, as you know, with any sort of new inbox that you get, that's something you have to learn how to manage then. So imagine, when we first started using email, you're kind of excited to get an email, and you're like, oh, what is this? This is new. But then after a while you go, oh my gosh, I get 100 emails a day. Like, how do I deal with this now? Are you concerned about that at all with Voxer, and how many Voxes you get?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and there's a few things to sort of unpack there really quick. So you didn't say this exact thing, so I'm not calling you out on it, and I'm sure you hear this from people too when you're doing your work. But when somebody hears like a new tool and they're like, oh, it's just another inbox to check, to me that's like an excuse, right? It's like, well, that's just sort of like keeping it at arm's length. It's like, well, no, this really could help you be more efficient. So for you to say like, oh, it's just another inbox, first of all, it means you have a bad relationship with your inbox, and that needs to be fixed, right? And you're not getting it basically. So you need to get it. You need to be sort of enlightened to that. So as far as it being overloading, so as I said, like voxwithari.com, again, anybody's welcome to go to voxwithari.com and send me a Voxer. I admit that I am really good audio visually, so I'm not a really good reader. I have a very hard time focusing on reading, but I just have a memory for audio visual stuff. So like if I watch a movie, it's kind of annoying, honestly, but if I watch a movie like once, I'll remember every line forever, which is, useful and more not. But so Voxer works really well for me. I have a team member, Joanna, who hates Voxer because she'll read like 3 books a day. Like, she is a reader. But she does it, and we work with it, and you can transcribe stuff in Voxer. And if there's something I really need her to know, I will write Joanna, because you can use text. So she and I are like 2 extremes. So I've never felt that overwhelmed, first of all. But for other people, some things to keep in mind. One is that you can listen at 2, 3, and 4 times speed, which is awesome. And so, you get a 10-minute message from somebody, listen at 4 times speed, 2.5 minutes, like you basically time traveled. And then the other thing to keep in mind, yes, people certainly can ramble when they're speaking, but in my experience and my opinion, the tonality and the emotion that you lose in text communication can actually be a lot more stressful than maybe listening to like a longer voice message. And I know that sounds a little bit vague, so let me just clarify that. Cameron Herold, who's an amazing business coach, he wrote Double Double and Vivid Vision. He always, I've seen him speak several times, and he always loves to give this example. He writes on the the slide, I didn't say that you were beautiful. That's the sentence. And then he has the audience read the whole sentence out loud together and emphasize each word separately. So it's first, it's, I didn't say you were beautiful, you know, and then I didn't say you were beautiful, right? And then I didn't say you were beautiful, right? So there's like 8 different ways to interpret the sentence, essentially. And some people are more aware of this than others, but a lot of times when you get an email and it's a little bit like that, a lot of times we'll go to like the worst possible version. I'm like, wait, what was he insulted? You know, what do they mean by that? So in that way, email actually offers an opportunity to be way less efficient because you end up thinking about it a lot more and it sticks with you a little bit more. And again, that's not every single email, but a lot of them. So the voice aspect, I find, eliminates most of that. And also, many times now in my experience, people will they'll go shorter, you know, so you'll get like a 7. I have one client who I speak to every single day. I don't think he's ever sent me a message that was longer than 16 seconds. You know, it's just like, quick question, Ari, blah, 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 done. You know, it would take me like much longer to read that email and then to respond to it. And then lastly, you can respond anywhere, anytime, you know, like literally between me walking from the 3rd floor of my house, we live in an old Victorian house, to the 1st floor, like I can respond to 2 messages, no problem.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated, to be honest, and I can see how this can be very effective and very efficient in many ways as well. And I actually really enjoyed our conversations on Voxer to make this really easy. So I can see myself using it because I've been kind of doing it on and off with other friends and family where we send each other voice messages. But because it's asynchronous with friends and family, the messages tend to be a little bit longer. So we're kind of like rambling for 2 minutes or 3 minutes as a way to kind of catch up. But I think if you have like a coaching relationship, as an example, it can be very straight to the point, and it's just like really simple and much more efficient than just doing email because, you know, with audio, you have the tonality, the voice, whereas with email, you just type and you kind of miss a lot of context there, like you were saying. So I can definitely see that.
Let me just jump in and add one thing to that. So I do have the maximum message you can do on Voxer is 15 minutes. And obviously you can just start another one. And I have clients regularly, actually, at least once or twice a week, I get like a 12, 13, 14-minute message. Initially you'd look at that and be like, oh, jeez. But what's so interesting? So first of all, I listen to it at multiple speeds. Usually, like I almost think about it like a podcast, you know, so I'll be doing other things, you know, I might be making lunch for the kids or like driving and I'll listen to these things. The experience that you get when somebody can talk uninterrupted and unfettered for that amount of time, I'm getting emotional depth and deep knowledge that I never got as a coach before. Because I mean, you know, we see each other, we see reactions. There is no situation where you're facing somebody, you're talking with somebody, and you're just going to talk for 12 minutes. There are certainly people who might go on and on and on, but you know, you're smiling a little bit right now, like you're moving around. Like I'm going to react to that. I'm not just going to talk for 10 minutes. It's just not going to happen. So even like somebody with a therapist, like the therapist might take notes, like there's an interaction there. So the idea that they can actually communicate in this vacuum, the stuff that comes out is fascinating. Like people just, I don't know, I guess they just feel safe, and it's very private. It's totally secure. And I get information from people that I just never was able to get as a coach before.
Yeah, that's really powerful. The last thing I want to ask you before we part ways here is the whole biohacking thing, because I had a shoulder surgery 3 years ago, and I was researching how to recover faster. I've always been interested in health in general, just living a healthy life. But once I had that injury, I challenged myself to say, okay, the typical recovery period is 6 months. How can I do this in 2 or 3 months, or half the time? So that kind of got me down this rabbit hole of learning about different tools out there and things, and kind of like how you mentioned how you discovered your sleep apnea. Where did your interest of biohacking come from? Is it because you discovered Crohn's disease and you're like, hey, I need to figure this out? Or like, where did this all start for you?
Yeah, it's 100% because of the Crohn's disease. And first of all, it's, as you were talking, I was thinking of like 17 things you could do for a shoulder injury. So that was fun. Um, uh, Previous to that, like, I would say that growing up, like, I was never really healthy. I feel like I was sick a lot. I had strep throat a lot. I was on antibiotics a lot. I was not breastfed. I was born by C-section. Like, my gut bacteria was probably all messed up forever. I had eczema. I had allergies. I had all sorts of things. And then I got diagnosed when I was, 23, and that was like the pinnacle. And I was at the highest point, I think around that time, I was probably almost 30 pounds heavier than I am now. And a lot of it wasn't just like, it wasn't fat necessarily. Like, a lot of it was inflammation and bloat. Like, I was really, really, really unhealthy. And so it started with, because of the Crohn's disease, I was getting like full blood panel tests every 5 weeks, partially also because of the medicine I was on. And for the first several months, I was getting these paper reports with my bloods, and I was just throwing it in a drawer. And when I sort of made this shift in this, which by the way happened, I was in the hospital one night, which had happened several times, but this particular night, it just felt like the end. Like, I just felt like I was going to die. And when I came out of it the next day, I was like, I got to do something different. So I was like, I have all this data. Let me do something with it, So I put it all in Excel and just started playing with numbers. And I still don't think that particular aspect actually did anything for me, but it was like the first step in taking back control of my body. And then I started really, the biohacking community is made up of some very hardcore science geeks and some real weird people. And it's great. It's like, it's the most welcoming community I think I've ever been a part of. And it's like, oh, you got to try this thing and that thing and this thing. And a lot of it's bad information, but it's a really good place to experiment. And that's the biggest thing, is that you have to be willing to experiment, which I always have been. I've always been interested in efficiency and operational efficiency and making things just run better. And this was the first time I turned that interest to my own body. So I just took that very sort of systematic, efficiency approach, very, very, very data-driven, and started experimenting. And things started to work. Some things definitely didn't work. And it got better and better. But the key thing, especially with Crohn's disease, and I would say especially with many inflammatory conditions, stress is such a big component of it. And to me, the greatest antidote to stress is control. And if we feel like we have some control over our body, over our data, over our information, over the things that we're doing to ourselves, that's the foundation to build upon, to actually heal yourself and then eventually optimize.
I started wearing the Oura ring, which is kind of like the fitness tracker that
I got one.
Oh yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I started wearing it about 2 years ago, and it's been an eye-opening insight in terms of my own body. So for example, I know that any sip of alcohol after 6 o'clock will drastically affect my sleep. And then it also depends on what type of alcohol I drink. A glass of red wine for me will just not help my sleep whatsoever. But if I drink a certain tequila brand, I have like no reaction to that whatsoever.
Is it the rocks tequila, Terramana?
No, it's the what's that with the white tall bottle? What's it called again?
I am not the right person to ask. I haven't drank in like 3 years.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see the responses that I have for different foods and drinks and so on.
Well, it's so subjective. It's so subjective. Otherwise, it's really fascinating when you see how your body like actually responds to things. The coolest one, in my opinion, is blood sugar tracking. Like, if you do like a constant glucose monitor, oh man, you just see how you respond to certain foods, to stress, to exercise, to sleep, everything, like, so immediately. It's fascinating.
Do you have one? Because I was interested in getting one from Levels, I think is the company.
Levels is great. I mean, I've used the Dexcom, which is the actual, like, the diabetic one, which is you have to get. Well, you used to have to get it through Canada and all this stuff, but yeah, Levels, great. And that information is invaluable. That and what we can do now with microbiome tracking, like through the company Viome, for example, those two pieces of information fix anything, in my opinion.
So what are some of the things or lifestyle changes that you've made ever since you kind of like got into this that you would recommend?
So I'll say, I think maybe the biggest one, because I'll be completely honest, like my diet now is not amazing. And part of that is just because of the 4 kids. And, you know, I kind of like put myself last when it comes to that stuff. Fortunately, we do eat most things at home, but like I'm not immune to ice cream and things like that. The number one thing for me, which is a non-negotiable, which I wish that I'd known about sooner, is intermittent fasting, like by far. So I eat between 12 and 8. And that's enormous for me. If I eat too early, I'll get very tired and like emotionally dysregulated to some extent. Plus it's efficient, obviously, not to have to worry about eating until noon. When I stop eating at 8, like my body gets a break for, 16 hours, whatever it is. And I wish that I had known about that at the beginning of my Crohn's journey, because I think that would have really accelerated my results. But that's the number one, also the easiest thing in many ways for people. So that's a huge lifestyle change, or it was, I guess. And then just a lot of supplements. I was never taking supplements before, and I take like 12 different supplements every day now.
Yeah, which can be a very deep rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yes. Well, when I referred to some of the things that didn't work, there were some supplements that really, really made me not feel good.
Right. What's your take on sleep? Because sleep obviously is a very big factor as well. And you kind of were talking about sleep apnea earlier. Like, how did you discover you had it, and how did you find out about that solution?
My wife kicked me out of bed a number of times because I was snoring so loud that like I finally had to do a sleep study, and which I did at home. It was really cool. And I was at the height. I think I stopped breathing like 14 times an hour, 14 times a minute, which is significant. I mean, I know people who've gotten like 30, 40, which is terrible. But so mine was like mild to moderate, but the Aura Ring was like consistently showing pretty poor sleep for quite a while, and it was accurate in that regard. And I think I kind of always knew there was something up, but I just hadn't done the sleep study. So finally did the actual sleep study and then got that diagnosis. So the CPAP really works, 100% works. I just don't like being hooked up to the machine at night. That's what I find kind of annoying. So that's why the Nora was really cool, because there's no contact.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Oh, but also, sorry. So to me, sleep timing is a really big one. So I generally go to sleep at midnight and I get up at 5:45 to 6 or so, which, most people tell you that's not enough sleep, and maybe it's not, but it seems to work very well for me. If I try to go to sleep earlier than that, it doesn't really work for me. And if I try to get up later than that, like I'll wake up naturally right before 6. If I go to bed, I get kind of groggy if I get too much sleep. So rather than fighting that, recognizing like that's my time, that's been really valuable too. I remember as a kid, like, as a 9-year-old, getting in bed at 9 o'clock or 9:30 or whatever my bedtime was, and like sitting in bed for like 2 hours and stressing that I wasn't going to get enough sleep and then be tired at school the next day. But it turns out I just needed less sleep.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of how we were talking about that earlier, like self-awareness. And I always say that self-awareness is like the ultimate productivity hack in a way, because the more you understand how you operate, your brain functions, and how you work, the more you can live up to that and optimize that. If you only need 6 hours of sleep, why would you then sleep 8 hours if you don't have to, right?
Right, exactly.
So I really enjoyed our conversation here today. If people want to find out more about you, what you're up to, what you're doing, I'm sure they can Vox you as well. But what are some resources you want to point people to?
So everything, I actually have a brand new website, which I'm very proud of. It took like 8 months to put together, but it's letsdoing.com. So everything is there. But yeah, voxwithari.com. Please go check it out, get in touch. And it's really me. Like, it's not an automation. It's not an assistant. It is me. So if you want to ask me questions, find out about our programs, whatever, you can do it either way.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ari, for being here today. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.